Here we go. Okay, so good afternoon everyone and welcome to this fourth meeting of Malditas e Inéditas, música se escribe con M de mujer, a virtual space for female musicians to share their experiences where questions are posed towards the role of musicology in building and spreading the hegemonic discourses. From a critical position, we discuss the patriarchy's sonic environment. This fourth season will address the situation of women in the field of composition in Asia, Europe, and North America. The guests will argue about controversial issues such as the vulnerability they have to face as female composers, the facts of gender roles, or the problems of developing their creativity when becoming mothers. They will also discuss the impact of their home country when being recognized as women composers in the international arena. Although more and more women are immersed in the pentagrams, only a few survive to the gender gap established by this patriarchal system. Very often, they drown by not being recognized as the other half of the population. They still remain invisible to our ears. In our last session, we were commenting on the surprising results of the report on the impact of the Spanish equality law in the field of culture in Spain. Numbers that assail us and at the same time hide the true faces behind this debacle. Another way to make women invisible. These yielding statistics remember us how much still remains until we achieve emancipation in music. According to the observatory, 19% of the premiers that take place in Spanish music festivals correspond to men. However, if we cross the ocean, NGO Women in Music counted in only 76 of 1,445 concerts offered last year by the most popular orchestras, included at least one piece composed by women. From all the works played, more than 3,500, only 2.3 were written by women. In 2018, the diplomat from the European Union and founder of United Voices for Peace, Veronica Sabag, alarmed by this data, decided to organize a concert in Rome under the premise of the 70th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The organization received more than 500 scores from hundreds of countries, which led Sabag to wonder why, if women composers were there, they were not recognized for their work. According to her, the music sector reflects in an almost extreme way the systemic problems that women have in society in general. To talk about it, we have three testimonies that reflect the realities that women had to face in Europe, North America, and Asia. Welcome to Eliza, HueyChing, and Lina. The music of composer Eliza Brown is described as delicate, haunting, and introspective. Her works have been performed around the world by leading new music ensembles and recording on multiple levels. Eliza's works are frequently intertextual, referencing existing pieces of music, historical musical styles, and other cultural artifacts. In HueyChing's works, energy is formed prior to sonority. This energy within her music refers to the musical stability and instability, including details that can be sensed and physically felt inside oneself when emotions are awakened within a human being. She explores the mystical point where physical and mental control during music performance cease to be. Finally, Lina Tonia is a John Award-winning composer born in Greece. Her work list includes more than 100 compositions for orchestra, ensembles, operas, and music for theater that have been performed in Paris, Vienna, London, New York, Boston, Moscow, Weimar, and so on. She was awarded with the title Composer of the Year 2020 from the Federation of American Musicians, Singers, and Performing Arts. So welcome to the three, and as you know, they will present their experiences during the first part of the event, and then you can participate during the debate time by writing your questions or maybe just switch on your microphones. So I let the word to Eliza. Eliza, when you want, you can start.
Thank you very much for that introduction, and thank you for having me. And I really look forward to hearing from my co-panelists and speaking with you this morning. So the first questions we were asked to consider were questions that have to do with the impact of the pandemic on our careers and how new technologies have been helpful or limiting during that time. So I think you know, the impacts of the pandemic for me are in some ways the obvious ones that we can probably all relate to: canceled performances, postponed premieres, and projects left in a kind of limbo where we don't know how they will be completed. I felt in March of last year that my career had attained a certain momentum, and now I feel less certain of continued opportunities within the field. But in terms of artistic creation, which is why I'm here and doing this, the most significant impact of the pandemic is the disruption of collaborative relationships. I do a lot of work that requires being with others in a room. So I do music theater pieces, I do interdisciplinary projects, I do site-specific work, and I have ongoing collaborations with women who are incarcerated at the Indiana Women's Prison. And for all of these kinds of work, I need to be in the same space as other people and in specific spaces. But right now, I live and teach in small town Indiana, 3 hours from Chicago, which is the nearest sort of big artistic hub city. And my collaborators are all over the United States. My closest family members are more than a day's drive away. I have no children, and my collaborators are like my family. So it is both artistically disruptive and lonely to be cut off from these people. Technology has been useful in allowing some of these collaborations to continue in a different way. And we're not using anything terribly fancy. Home audio equipment and basic tools designed for workplaces. Zoom, Google Drive, and file sharing services have been a big part of life. So for example, there's one interdisciplinary project I'm working on with a poet, a visual artist, an animator, a violinist, and a set designer. And the sound for this piece consists of field recordings, recorded poetry reading, and solo violin music. And I found that working with field recordings has been great during this time. It's not necessarily a new technology or new approach, but it allows me to feel a sense of discovery in my local environment when I'm listening to my location through my headphones and curating those sounds. And it allows me to construct my local world into something I can share with people who are far away. I can collaborate with people in Chicago and Boston, among other locations. And it's affected the kind of score I'm creating. So I'm creating a flexible score that allows the violinist to interact spontaneously with the field recordings. So she can have a kind of chamber music experience, although she's playing by herself in a room. It's very difficult to work on spatialization of sound. But our set designer is learning an architectural modeling software that lets us drop video material into different frames in these three-dimensional spaces that he can build. So all that's great, but we do still feel the loss of these aspects of in-person collaboration. So the serendipity that happens when you're in a room together, physical cues about how everyone's feeling about the work, and the energy of being in the room. There's a sense of loss of identity. For me, being a composer is about connecting with others. And without that in-person collaboration, it's really hard to hold on to that sense of identity. Some can continue maintaining that identity through an internet presence, but that's not my preferred space. I find that social media in particular, those spaces are dominated by men with loud, brash opinions. And it's not how I prefer to spend my time. One place where technology is not at all applicable is in my collaboration with women who are in prison. My collaborators in that space do not have access to communicative technology. And so plans to perform work by composers at the prison had to be completely canceled as we're not able to connect with them at all. And the extreme isolation of people in prison during the pandemic is part of a larger set of human rights issues in United States prisons that have been made worse during this time. To think a little bit about where women composers find themselves now and as the pandemic ends, I'd like to quote Virginia Woolf's 1929 essay, A Room of One's Own, where she says, "A woman must have money and a room of her own if she is to write fiction." I think we can sort of obviously extend this to music, not just fiction. And we could perhaps add the element of time. So we need money, we need time, we need a space of our own. As the pandemic blurs the line between home and work, the position of any individual woman depends a lot on whether her home environment provides these things: money, time, and private space. Children, other family obligations, or other jobs that must be worked from home make this harder. Personally, I don't have children. I would like to, but I've put off that possibility until after the pandemic. The situation for working parents in the United States is very bad, regardless of one's profession. For now, without children, I can create at home in relative peace. My husband is supportive and shares household work, and I'm a professor, which gives me financial stability to create. However, that job does take much of my time. In the United States, it's very difficult to survive as an artist without some kind of other employment due to government policy. We have no nationalized healthcare, we have no national paid maternity leave, and other policies limit the possibilities to sustain oneself as a freelance artist. So I devote a lot of time to teaching in order to have healthcare. And I think that the women artists whose careers are most likely to survive this pandemic are those who have all three things: money, time, and space. However, though my creation space is working for me at home, I do think that invisibility is a problem. It's easy to sort of shrink into the domestic sphere. And I feel that myself at the moment with no in-person performance happening. And so my hope is that as in-person performance returns and in-person collaboration returns, presenters and commissioning artists don't only turn to those who have been active on the internet, which can be a space that is hostile to women, and is not a space that's conducive to all forms of art making. So we should not let the limitations of what is possible virtually condition artistic curation going forward unconsciously. I want to say a little bit about sort of my position as somebody in the United States. So as we think about women and culture in the post-pandemic era, I'm thinking about this as a white middle-class woman in the state of Indiana, where a majority of residents of the state hold very conservative political and social views. There's no law against hate crimes. And so this is the environment in which I live. The United States urgently needs to confront its history and present of racism, which permeates every social system, from policing and prisons to the arts. So I think the position of women in culture is a very important question, but for me, it can't be separated from the need to address these other systems of oppression, particularly oppression on the basis of race, but also religion, immigration status, sexuality, disability, and other areas of difference. Women experience oppression on the basis of sex or gender, but may hold other forms of privilege in society, and thus have a responsibility to be in solidarity with one another and with groups who are even more marginalized within the arts. And as we take stock of the post-pandemic landscape, we know that there will be jobs and careers lost. There will be opportunities gained. There will be new forms of expression and new spaces of creative activity. There will be change to what we knew before. There will also be fewer financial resources to support the arts, at least for some time. And it may be tempting to take what we can without sharing those resources, but I think that a spirit of collectivism is needed. We must ensure that the new arts landscape is intentionally designed to reduce inequity rather than perpetuate it. So I think the pandemic offers us an opportunity to not continue with business as usual. And women have a responsibility to take part in reshaping the landscape to benefit others as well as ourselves. And I can speak a little bit about how I've approached this, because it's easy to have those lofty goals, and it can be difficult to find the spaces to put them into practice. So I don't claim to have found those spaces perfectly or to be done thinking about this. But I can share some of how I've tried to enact that kind of collectivism in the projects that I've chosen to work on. So to go a little bit into the genre specifically of opera and music theater. The American opera scene is very difficult to break into as a composer and very conservative aesthetically. So there are limits to what one can propose. Very few people are commissioned to write new operas overall, and women are underrepresented within that group of composers who are commissioned. So I've chosen to not really pursue big opera companies and traditional routes for the presentation of opera and music theater. So I've chosen to create music theater outside of those spaces, which allows all of the collaborators involved to set the terms of the collaboration, create our own infrastructures, define the roles that each of us has in the collaboration, and to take artistic risks that are not possible at a large company. For example, I've collaborated with women at Indiana Women's Prison on an opera about Juana of Castile. And this was a really wonderful partnership with women who are marginalized by society due to their race, sexuality, or just the fact of having been convicted of a crime. So this was a collaboration in which their words and musical input were respected because Juana of Castile was a political prisoner, and my colleagues on this project had direct experience of prison that I could not bring to the project. So they had knowledge that I did not, that was necessary for the project to be successful. We had a woman-led creative team for the production, and the men involved in the production team intentionally took a step back. So we were conscious of the fact that this was a woman-led creative team. And this required clarity about our working relationships. It required care for each other, and it required care for the contributions of our incarcerated collaborators who could not be present for the production itself. I had the experience of attending a concert at my university right after that production mounted that was a military band concert by a branch of the American military. And most of the audience were older white men. And there was a gun salute on the stage. And it was such a strange contrast to me to have just experienced this very intentional women-led collaboration that was all about equity, going to this display of patriarchal militarism. And it made me realize how unusual my experience of creating this opera was in the context of the overall musical landscape I've experienced throughout my life. I have experienced disdain from people in the opera world about my vision for a collaborative approach. An opera conductor from a European country once told me that I did not have a vision because I didn't know what I wanted. By involving other people, it was evidence that I did not have a vision. I disagree. I think I have a vision of the composer as the facilitator of a collaborative process, who issues invitations to and shares power with other artists. And the basic principle of this is what I would call distributed authorship. And that's a term from scholar Judy Lockhead, who has studied my opera on Juana of Castile. So I think how we structure our projects and our working relationships really matters, and that we can offer alternatives to hierarchical and patriarchal models of traditional music institutions. So I think that as we think about the role of women in culture after the pandemic, if we have the capacity to be active in the public life of the arts, that we should continue to seek this kind of collective power to create new spaces that don't perpetuate the inequities of the past. And as we might in any collaboration, share resources, share power, and make space for other voices that need to be heard. We don't all have this capacity. Family obligations, children, and other ways in which gendered work asks more of us than of men may get in the way. For example, in my job as a professor, I do a lot of care work. Students come to me with their personal problems in ways that they don't come to my male colleagues. And I do feel like I have to work harder than men in order to be perceived as excellent. And there's extra psychological work in convincing myself that I belong in the world of new music. It's harder to get noticed. My Juana of Castile opera received relatively little press compared to an opera by a male composer presented on the same series by the same ensemble. But what I tried to tell myself is to be clear about what I want and need. I think part of solidarity is reaching out when we need support or being clear with ourselves when our working conditions are not tolerable. If we're clear with ourselves, we can be clear with others and take steps toward our goals. And we start by believing that we deserve the things we need to create, whether that is money, time, or a room of our own. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. That's so inspiring, your words. I have lots of questions. So, Ching, do you want to go now?
Yeah, sure. I can start now. Yeah. Thank you. So it was fascinating to hear what Eliza said just now. So some of that actually I think we share some experience as well. So I'm going to talk about more on other sites so that you have a different views of things. So regarding about pandemic and creative experience, I think aside what Eliza already mentioned to us, all the very technical stuff and like the in-person connections when you work, I think another problem aside from that, I think another problem is that even though we usually work at our home as a composer, we like home is our office, but when you're working at home, even though the daytime or the time that you work, there's nobody in the house, so you're completely alone, right? So it still feels like you have your own space. But during the pandemic, it's like 24 hours, there are people in the house. So it's different. It's not just a physical space, it's how the whole environment is. And that actually sometimes makes me feel that it's very hard to redirect yourself to focus on work sometimes, because people are all around and they might just, family members sometimes when they want to talk to you, they will just knock and stuff, right? So it's nothing wrong with it. It's a normal thing, but it's just that you have to, when you want to try to focus on something, and then it's a little bit hard when you don't have a full concentrations. And another thing is that because also before the pandemic, what I usually do, even though there's a lot of days that I might be spending at home, like without going out just to work on a piece of new compositions, especially when I'm doing the final work. But once it finished, I have to go out to disconnect completely from that work before I can start to work on another piece. And I think that disconnecting part is very important for me to just go out, to have a walk, or to do just something different, or to maybe meet friends, to have teas and stuff like that. But because of this, during the lockdown, there's no such thing. So the first lockdown, I was actually in Madrid. So that time was like quite a strict lockdown. So the only time we get is to go out to the supermarket to get the grocery. So I'll work in the room that I rented for 10 days straight. Like cook everything just in the room for 10 days straight. And once reached the 10 days, it's the happiest moment that I can go out for grocery shopping just for that 1 hour maybe, just to get all the things I need for the next 10 days. But that is the first time I actually realized how important it is to be able to disconnect from your work and come back to reconnect from your work. It's not just about disconnecting, it's also about reconnecting. And all this thing has to do with the freedom we have to go out and come back, or to change the space you are in. And that, I think, is the most challenging part for me, besides just not being able to work directly with musicians. I think that the part when I'm composing, that's the most difficult part for me. So in terms of technology, I think it's great that now we can have, we can just bring all the materials we need when we are traveling. So one thing I have to talk about is, before talking about technologies in Malaysia, the situations on contemporary music, it's really bad. I think before we can talk about whether female composer or male composer, we have to talk about just being composer in Malaysia itself is not a realistic job choice or a career choice. It's just there's no such career for a composer in Malaysia, because there's not many events going on. So you can say that basically in 2010, that's the year when I go to Tokyo to further my study. But before that, I was trying to study as a composer here, and I entered to a university. And when during the audition, I tell them that I want to be a composer. And then after I got into university, I said I want to apply for compositions major, and then they look at me and say, there's no compositions major here. Yeah, it's a funny thing how Malaysia's university, I mean, we have no conservatories, okay? So if you go to university, yes, there is like some university will have like music department, okay? So you'll be able to get a bachelor degree in performing arts. So, but you will never see any clear listing that you can be majoring in what kind of instruments, because usually once you come in, when they accepted you, when they will ask you what do you want to be majoring, then they'll go to look for, they'll outsource a teacher. So I didn't realize that there's no way that I can study compositions in that university when I entered the university. So that is a funny story. It's so uncommon to have someone to have a composition major here. So of course after that I have my other ways. There are composers in Malaysia. It's not that they don't exist, they do exist, so that I go to study privately instead of doing what I want to do in my bachelor degree. So my bachelor degree was a piano major, and then I studied privately with a composer, and then after that I applied to Tokyo, where you have a proper conservatory with compositions major, other majors, so I went there. So that is one thing. So because of that, you will realize that most of my work, when there's a premiere or there's a collaborative work, is usually outside of Malaysia. It's rarely in Malaysia. If in Malaysia, it's usually also some performers that I have worked with in other countries. They come to Malaysia to have a solo recital. So because we worked with before, so they pick up my work to be part of the program of their recital. But the real work that I'm doing as a composer is usually outside of Malaysia, either in Europe or in Tokyo, because that's where I studied in Tokyo. So it's usually like that. So here I don't really have a job. So in Malaysia, usually the job that I have is just teaching. So usually I'm doing a lot of teaching here. So by coming back here, because of the pandemic, so I just have to come back here for the moment until I can fly again. So the thing is that I do feel that I'm completely being cut off from the creative environment that I like, that I feel home at, actually. So when I come back to my own home country, actually I feel like I'm a foreigner, more of a foreigner than when I'm outside, because the environment is completely different. So so this is the, how should I say this? So this is one thing about the Malaysian situation. So I think there's physically there's already a problem for composers to be in to actually work in Malaysia, to do a lot of creative art. It's not completely impossible. It really depends on what kind of music you are aftering, of course. What kind of music is more of your focus. If you're talking about improvisations based music, we have amazing performers here. So when I came back, it was the first time that I tried to work with improvisers. So instead of composing, I was actually improvising with them just to learn something from them. But of course, I wouldn't end up becoming an improviser. It's just a different field, but it's a good experience. And I realized we have amazing improvisers in Malaysia. So that's one thing. So going back to about this pandemic thing and the technology thing. Okay, I think with the technology, because of that, you realize I have to travel more often, and usually it's a 20 hours flight. Once I travel for premieres and stuff, it wouldn't be around this country. I have to go quite far away. So it's very difficult to carry a lot of books or a lot of informations with you when you are traveling with flights all the time, like 20-hour flights usually. So it's very convenient nowadays. I can just, like put everything into PDF. I bring everything. So even when I arrive in another country, I can go straight to the hotel and start working. I have all my information, so I can do a deal. So that is one good thing. And of course nowadays, because of the pandemic, we don't get to go to concerts. Even if I'm in Europe now, there's also a lot of places are still under lockdown. I don't really get a chance to go to concert, but so there's a lot of amazing concerts being shown online, and it was for free. Like recently, there's this Yogi Kurtak's birthday concert, 3 days online. It was amazing. So I have to stay up like 3 a.m. here just to watch the concert. But it's still different, I feel, when you are there physically listening. You are not just listening by your ears, you're listening with your whole body. So you feel the atmosphere, you feel how the sounds vibrate through. It's something very real. It's not metaphoric, it's something very real. And I think that is very important. And that is something that I think we are actually losing due to the pandemic, even though there might be more exposure on online, more concerts online, but the physical listening part, I think we are getting less and less in that. So if this kind of situations goes longer, it really would change how we listen to music. I think that is a very important thing. And I have to emphasize this also, is that in Malaysia there's rarely music concert, like I mentioned before. And that's why when I went to Tokyo the first time in 2010, it was crazy, because in Tokyo you have like 100 concerts going on in a day. Like, it's a very exciting, it doesn't matter if it's a good concert, bad concert, like what kind of genre, it doesn't matter. It's just like everywhere is something happening. So I actually just go to as many concerts as I can. Anything that I can find, anything that I can fit into my schedule, I just go. So that is when I actually understand what music really is, like, because those are the things that you cannot read from book and know that, okay, this composition's idea is this. So you listen to a recording, yes, it sounds like that, but it's very different. Sometimes you don't know anything about this composer, but you go to the concert, as long as if it's a performance is really good, you sit there, you could actually understand it quite directly without even needing to read anything. Sometimes I feel that that's a personal experience. So that's when I realized this physical listening, it's so important, so important. It's not just about concept, it's things that your body can actually tells you when you listen to that. So I think that's one thing that we might lose because of pandemic. But of course, when a door is closed down, something new will be opened up. So if there's a different way of listening, there's a different types of music will arise. That is something that I think it will happen. So that's on technology. So back to the topic about being a woman composer. So from my observations, I think if you don't think about what kind of professions first, so this pandemic actually does amplify the gender roles, I think, because you will, especially in family situations, I think this will be amplified. You will get, sometimes you might hear somebody, oh, because you're a woman you have to do this, because you're this you have to do that, and it's a very strange thing for me. So, but I think because of this, I think a lot of time it's not just what is the actual situations, it's really a lot of time is that when we're taught we are young that, okay, you're a woman, you have to do this, you have to wear this, you have to act like this, you have to react like this. So because of all these things inside our brain, like, and different cultures of course have different way of expressing it, so different cultures, different expectations for sure, and sometimes I don't think it's actually related to the actual life we are having, because there's a lot of things has been changing already, but that's not really something that correspond to how we think. So I think because of the pandemic, these kind of questions will be amplified. So I think hopefully more people will start to ask whether is the gender roles that we believe or we were taught by older generations, or maybe by the general ideas of the society, are they actually correspond to the role we are really actually doing? So this is one question I think we have to ask. And then, is that specified gender roles, is it really necessary? I don't see the necessity in a specified gender role. It's not just on women, it's also on men. Sometimes, especially in Asia, I think there's some kind of myth about men has to be like this, men has to do that, this kind of stress. I have an older brother, so I observe how we grow up, of course. I mean, we grew up together. It's not much of observing, but really we grew up together. So I can see the stress he has. If you analyze it, it's a lot not to do with about his ability. It's more about society expecting him, because he's a man, he has to be able to do this, he has to be able to do that, like a kind of like strange responsibility. And even, I mean, now it's 21st century, there's a lot of things shouldn't be divided like that. It's not because you're a man or you're a woman you have to do that. It really depends on your ability, what you are more inclined to, what you are more interested to, you go and do that. So there's a good balance, you can have a good balance there. So that's why I would really like to suggest more people to think, instead of just thinking about women and men, but think about, is it really necessary to have specific gender role? Is it so important that men must be like this, women must be like that? Instead of looking at each individual as a human being, this human being has this ability, and this human being excel in this part, and he or she can just go on and do things like that. So I think that is one thing that I would really like to suggest most people to think of. And then in terms of composers part, I actually I have to be very honest that I feel very strange when people keep classifying me as a female composer. I mean, I am a composer. I mean, I am a female, but being a composer has nothing to do with whether I'm a female or a male. I don't compose and telling myself I'm a female composer, I have to compose this sound, I have to express this way. There's no such thing. When you're a composer, you're a composer. It's not about your gender. So, but of course I understand the necessity to have all these events that based on female composers because of the chances. I mean, that is based on the society problem. But I think the root of it is that society has such a fixed ideas of how female should act, male should act, and that created this kind of segregations. Okay, so I don't deny the difficulty that women will face when you're in your own professions. That are definitely is real. It's not a fake. It's real. Those kind of difficulties are definitely real. But eventually, I hope that we can go towards the directions where we can see composer as a profession has nothing to do with gender. That is more important, I think. Okay, so that's my thoughts on that. So on post-pandemic, I will say that the main concern that I will have for the post-pandemic is, I think the way we listen to music will change, and I'm curious like what kind of new format or a new style of music or new ideas in music will actually arise because of that. That might be something interesting, but I hope that we don't lose the part where we really have developed for so many years already with the physical part that we can be in a concert hall and enjoy those kind of music. I really hope that we won't lose that. And so it's a lot of things we have to see, like what will happen next. So yep, those are my basic ideas. Thank you.
Thank you, Ching, for your words. So Lina, it's your turn. If you want.
Yes, of course. Thank you again for the invitation. I would like to start talking about the impact of the pandemic situation to my creative experience. It's true that the pandemic situation changed our lives dramatically. From my experience, in the first period when we did not know the depth of this development, I felt very creative. I started composing one work after other. I spent almost all of my hours composing, and through this process I created a balance inside me, which convinced me that although many activities have been banned, I can continue to create. The result was within a period of 3 months, that was the duration of our first lockdown, I composed finally a work for a string trio, a work for a soprano, clarinet and piano, a work for saxophone, violin and piano, and a work for a choir and harp that was a commission. I wrote 4 works in a duration of 3 months. That was a very productive period for me, and one of this work was awarded in the international composition competition Gedok in Germany. In the second phase of pandemic, from autumn onwards, although I still wanted to be creative, I noticed to myself that I did not have the mental strength that I had in the previous period. The reason was clear. There was now a mental tiredness from the incarceration, which began to wear down the productive process and reduce my physical strength. I cannot say that I stopped working or that I did not compose new works. To be precise, I wrote 3 works, one for guitar and cello, the other for 7 instruments, that was a commission, and finally a work for a choir and electronics that inspired from the pandemic, as the electronic part used sounds from the intensive care unit. But I felt that I did not have the clear thinking that I had in the past. It started from the negative psychology that was created in the second wave of the pandemic. Although there was a negative psychology due to the pandemic, I had an announcement concerning my compositional activity, as you said at the beginning, that was the international award from new work, the title of Composer of the Year. That filled me with positive energy and motivated me to keep working. But of course, the negative psychology made me to be not myself. At the same time, as far as distance learning is concerning, the new technologies seemed extremely useful. And with the use of internet, I was able to teach normally without changing the quality of the course. I can say that my teaching hours have increased. At the same time, my students and I had the opportunity presenting new works in an online concert. This was something that has never happened before, and it mobilized us really very positively. Although new technologies gave me the opportunity to continue teaching composition normally, increasing my teaching hours, as I said, I felt that they did not give me the chance to work as a composer with the same privilege. There is an important change for a composer in the pandemic period. This is the way in which a work is presented to the public, and at the same time, the way we work with the musicians. While new technologies make it possible to view a concert online, the concert may not have the same significance as when it was performed live. There is a lack of contact with the musicians. There is a lack of contact with the audience, and generally a lack of the human element in a real dimension. This real dimension also changed the way someone receives music through a screen. Also, collaborations with the musicians cannot be done just as efficiently. Many times, a rehearsal cannot be completed due to technical problems. I would like to give an example from a personal experience that I had the last months. During the first wave of the pandemic, and especially during the summertime, we had to rehearse a work of mine for soprano, clarinet, and piano. The musicians were in Germany and I was in Greece. We decided to rehearse my work via Zoom, and during most of the rehearsal time, there was not a good connection and I could not hear enough parts of my work. Of course, musicians could not be aware for this problem and kept playing. So there are moments in which the distortion was huge and I cannot distinguish all the 3 instruments. You can understand that we do not manage to work. The online communication cannot be useful to us many times. Let me also remember one more example. I had a commission for a choir and a harp, and the project was going to take a premiere in USA. Of course, it was postponed, but there was no possibility for the musicians to work on the piece, even for an online rehearsal via Zoom or Skype. The reason is very simple. No choir could work without the physical presence of the musicians in a common place. That was a difficulty. And this difficulty deprived the opportunity to work with the musician just for one rehearsal. One more experience I had was a commission from the State Orchestra of Athens here in Greece. I was in Thessaloniki at home. The rehearsal was in Athens. And in order to listen to the rehearsal, the musician recorded it, then sent me the file to make some notes or correction. And then we had a call and discuss the issues of piece in order to continue the rehearsal. So you understand that to some extent, new technologies are useful, but they cannot replace the human presence. I believe that in the pandemic period, the possibility of the projection has been generally deprived of artists. But there is an advantage. At the moment, a composer can become more visible to her audience because the audience is now in front of his screen. I want to say that people spend more time in front of their computer because they have been deprived of their privilege of doing the rest of their activities. And yes, now they may be watching more events going up on the internet. But for me, the art should not be under such a microscope because people who truly love the art are the people who will look for music of a composer from their own. Now I think it is an opportunity that is given mainly to untrained audience. It is a chance to get to know each other, this category of music, and also to know some names of composers, which under other circumstances we would not have heard. The question is, how much can this distract a person who is generally not a friend of this music? So people who love art and know what they would like to hear, they have already done so. Now there may be some occasional art lovers who will just spend a few minutes of their time in front of the screen, selected new experiences. When I'm thinking which is the suitable place for a woman to create and to express her thoughts, I say that it is a place that she feels free. The pandemic situation has caused the exact opposite feeling. The pandemic has taken away the feeling of freedom, even if we are staying at home. The result is a lack of inspiration, because the house has become a place of work and not a place of relaxation. From this point of view, there is a loss. The reason for the loss is simple. Every day that contributes to creativity and creates new perspectives of development has unfortunately become a day that should simply pass. This is why we have the obligation to work, and not because we have the undiminished need for expression and creativity. When art obtains a must, then its truth is lost, because art contains truth, and that is its beauty. I imagine that for people who don't live alone, I live alone, but I imagine for people who don't live alone, but live with their family, living together in a closed place for 24 hours in a day creates an even more intense feeling of pressure. And in these cases, the life of a composer becomes much more difficult. The productivity of a composer has preconditions, and within them, the dominant one is the precondition of inner freedom, the freedom of thought, the freedom of mind, and the freedom of soul. When a private space becomes a public space, we lose our freedom, we lose the sense of peace, and gradually we lose our inspiration. The private space is a place of relaxation, and it would produce many psychological problems if we use it for work. About the post-pandemic era, it is true that when we will overcome the state of the pandemic, we will see around us a new and a very different image of the reality. nothing will be able to have the same shade. And the reason is not just the huge economic disaster that each country has suffered individually. The main reason will be the huge change of our souls. Because being creative and productive, having positive energy for life and creation are concepts that starts from inside. They come from our inner face. They come from our inner voice. They are concepts that connected with the power of our soul. We are currently in a period in which we're spending the positive reserves of our soul, and we have no way to fill our inner world and ourselves with positivity. The result will be all this exhaustion to become in front of us in the future as a natural obstacle to our evolution. For this reason, I don't know if I can answer exactly in which stage art will find the culture and man after this unexpected experience of the pandemic. We're changing, but unfortunately, we don't change temporarily. We're changing to a depth that will affect our future and our development. I wish we will find a hope that will keep us optimistic. Only hope can help us right now. We need positive energy in order to create and feel inspired again from simple things like the sun, like a walk by the sea, like a beautiful view from a nature. There are simple, small things that they motivate our creativity, and we will meet them again soon, I hope. At this moment, I would like to conclude my thoughts saying that yesterday an open concert was a first movement to restart culture in Israel. The concert was only for audience who have been vaccinated. So this is a kind of hope that we're waiting for. About the acceptance now of woman composer in society, I would like to share an experience. Personally, I was the first female composer who studied composition at the Aristotle University of Thessaloniki here in Greece. And I felt this difference from the first moment of my studies. Until then, the composition department had only male students. Maybe it was accidental, or maybe it had something to do with the devaluation of the female mind in composition. Only when I started studying composition was 15 years before this moment we're talking about. I can say that I felt strongly the negative criticism from my classmates. Not exactly the negative, but a tendency to devalue the female gender and a woman's abilities in composition. I can say that it activated me positively and filled me with the power to prove that a woman can compose, and a woman can create, yes, and can think original. This negative treatment gradually became an impressive acceptance by the whole. I don't know why a female composer can be underestimated, even though history has shown that many female composers have left amazing works in history. Thank you.
Thank you, Lina, for your words. Thank you, the three of them, because you've been wonderful. I would like you to go in depth about this lack of identity that you have underlined, Eliza, Ching, and you, Lina, because you speak about this loss of place and this loss of time. And in consequence, I think this is a very philosophical problem from a Kantian perspective. It's like space and time give us identity, and now we have lost the sense of space, because the inner space is also the public space. So the creativity is also affected, and in consequence, time is also affected by this way of living we are having. We are an example. We were talking in the backstage that we have different times, no? We are in different countries, so this sense of time is also with this lack of identity, of the changes in identity we are suffering. So I would like to go in depth about this kind, how has affected to you in personal, from a personal perspective. For example, Ching was speaking before starting the event about her experience when trying in composing the first months of the pandemic, when she was composing, and you'll have to take a lot of time because you couldn't imagine the sound, you couldn't work with people, so the human contact is very important when composing. Could you tell the audience the anecdote, because I think it was very illustrative about what is happening now. You are lacking this human contact, and technologies is not the solution for all the problems with creativity and when working with music.
Yep, it's for that. It's that because one thing that I think we all have to realize is that when you're listening to a sound, the sound is not just let's say, just make it simple. If you're listening to a C note, you do not just listen to a C note. There's a lot of overtones. There's a lot of like very 3D dimensions thing there, and you have to be in a really physical space. And something is that you don't even hear it, but you sense it. Those things actually do exist. So it's not a metaphor. It's really something that exists. So let's say if I'm working with a performance online, so it's not just a technical problem. Sometimes you have to imagine that usually when I rehearse with performers, like I would like to take like different steps. So I will imagine, like, let's say the performance situations like at this site, right? So maybe I'm rehearsing at this distance, okay? So but sometimes I have to imagine for a concert hall it's much further, right? So sometimes I would tend to walk away to go a further place to actually listen. How does the sound changes because of the physical distance? And all these are actually part of the things that you have to think about when you're composing. So especially when you deal with very delicate sound. Of course, you can say that you put on a mic that things can change, but once you put on the mic, when you're playing the sounds, even though it's audible, the physical energy that you play, the performer needs to produce the sound is different. So all these things is into consideration. So for me, it's very difficult to actually work with performers online, like just with Skype, because the sound is completely different already. So whatever is discussed is through a mic, right? So what I hear is through a speaker. So the way how I feel and sense the sounds is completely different. It will not give the actual sounds that I want in terms of those kind of inspirations I need to compose. It's why that I will not be able to do that. So instead of that, I actually just get the instrument and try to blow myself. And it also make it quite difficult because I'm not trained. So things that people might just, a performer might be able to show you in 10 minutes, I might take 3 months to actually reach that stage to be able to actually get that. But even before pandemic time also, I do take the instruments and play. It's just that I have more the luxury. If I really can't get it within a week, I can say that I can knock on someone's door or go to the performers, just say that, can you show me? Like, can you tell me what am I doing wrong, or which part is a part that I should try to do better? But through online, it's quite difficult. Yeah.
Eliza, you have talk about you are a site-specific composer, and do you think is there any possibility to have a site-specific in virtual space? How does anyone readapt this concept of the site-specific to the virtual space?
Yes, and so my thoughts in response to your question also relate to what Xing was just saying. So this one interdisciplinary project that I'm working on right now started before the pandemic. And it's based on poetry that was written, a few years ago at this point. But the subject is about having a secret that one has held for a long time. And the secret is never revealed, but it's about how the secret sort of changes somebody and changes the way they interact with the world. And so we've really been thinking of this piece as sort of existing in a space, but that space is like human interiority. And so we can think about it spatially, but it doesn't have to be any literal room. And so we're imagining that the piece can be adapted to a variety of different real physical spaces in the future. But it's become this kind of more abstract idea of what space is. As we think about sort of psychological space, that it's like a theater of interiority. And so that's a very sort of abstract way of answering the question, but it is seeming to work for my team at the moment. But in terms of sound, I think because there's this intimacy of the subject matter, it lends itself to a sound world that is very sort of up close to your ears. And so it's been easier to work on that project during the pandemic because in some ways the sound world that is true to the piece, it's okay if we don't have the resonance of a hall, at least right now at this stage of development. We're working with field recordings, and even the violin material is sounds that really engage with the materiality of the instrument, a lot of white noise. And those are things that I might want to close mic anyway, and might not have a lot of resonance. Sounds that we hear outdoors kind of have the resonance of the outdoors, and the field recordings capture that. So we're able to create a sense of a kind of constructed space. And so I think some of the things that were already true about that project and just the nature of what it is, we've been able to continue it during this time because it sort of worked for the limitations on sound and sound transmission that we currently have. But Lina, I really appreciated your comments on, bringing this into our own psychology and our souls. And I find that to work on anything, whether it's a project that feels right for this time or not, I have to have a real kind of discipline about knowing myself and knowing, when is my soul ready to be creative? And if it's not, to let that be okay, and maybe not work. It's a difficult thing to make decisions about, but it requires a kind of self-knowledge that I feel like I've gained in this time.
I think because of the confinement and the lockdown, we have lost the sense of interior and exterior and these kind of problems. We don't know ourselves as we used to know. So it's kind of, we have to study ourselves first to define when and where we do we start, and then when and where does the public or the audience or the private space start or finish. So I think it's kind of interesting. And Lina, you spoke about I understood you have some works that were commissioned to you during the pandemic, and I was wondering if they were commissioned, or the institution who commissioned these works were thinking in public rehearsals, in concert halls, or if they commissioned the works just okay, write this and we'll see the rehearsals how they going, or we'll see about the concert halls or the premieres. Because I think it's very different, and you have outlined, it's very different composing for the online space or virtual premiere than composing for an audience in a concert hall. So I was wondering which condition of works did they propose to you when these works during the pandemic came to you?
Yes, I had two commissions. The first one was for a piece for cello and guitar. And when I took a commission, we didn't know the situation with the pandemic. So finally, the concert took place in Vienna at the summertime. And the concert was just for 40 people, a very, very small audience because of the pandemic. And I didn't travel to Vienna because I want to be careful with the situation. I didn't want to fly there. So I worked with the musicians via Zoom. We had a rehearsal. It was very difficult because there was a distortion of the sound. And it is very different to have a physical rehearsal, to can explain to the musician what exactly you want to listen when you're there. The second commission I had, it was for an online concert. So I knew that it will be recorded. It was a piece for 7 instruments from the State Orchestra of Athens. They made the recording and then they upload the concert online. So it was a new experience for me, but I prefer to listen to my music on a concert hall traditionally.
Okay, so there is a question that Ching has brought, and it's about the necessity or not of addressing you like women composer, because composing is a job, it's a work, but what do you think? I would like to hear you about what do you think, if it's necessary or not, or to what extent is necessary, or to what extent is not. I don't know how to explain. Maybe it's not the way to do it, to visibilize, to make visible women composers. If we are constantly addressing that you are women composer, female composer, and just maybe the solution is, okay, you are composer, we have to study you because you are composing. I would like to hear you about what you think.
Of course, I agree with Sink that told to be a composer, it's not about to be a female or male composer, because the art is for everyone. The beautiful mind may inspire beautiful works and amazing pieces. So I don't think that we have to differentiate music through gender.
And Eliza, what do you think about it?
Yeah, I think we have to separate when we're talking about gender, how that applies to discussions about the work itself and how it applies to discussions about the structures in the field. And so if we're talking about the work, and Ching, I think you kind of said this, if we're talking about the work, then it doesn't matter, right? We can't hear the sound of someone's gender necessarily from the work. Although I think if artists want to construct their gender in sound, then I'm happy to listen that way, but I want that to be on their terms. But when we're talking about the structures of the field, then we have inequity. And so then it is relevant to talk about gender. And so I think that separation is important when we have these conversations.
Yeah, that's true. I don't know if there is any question, although we don't have too much audience, but I think we have here Steve Kevenser, who is curator from the Music and Gender in Internet. Maybe she wants to address any idea or to point something or any comments. You have to switch on your microphone because it's okay.
Yes, I just wanted to
I cannot hear you. You have.
I did it. So,
Yeah.
oh. Thank you very much for the great talks we heard, really, and to have an insight in the in your form of work in this pandemic situation. And I found it so great to see it from other countries, to hear from other countries. And I really think sometimes if one day this will stay in my mind. It will stay in my mind that I got the chance to hear really other countries, other peoples I never would have heard before, even if the situation is very hard for you and certainly for all musicians and all people who are around of music. And I found it very impressive to hear that you think that the pandemic situation would change the aesthetics of music and the form of hearing the music. And I found it a very special point. And I would ask if you have an idea in which way the aesthetics of music will be changed for a longer time. Not for today, not for tomorrow, but for in 5 years, for example. Will there be, do you have an idea in which way this will form us?
Sure, I don't know. Okay, just a brief thing. Okay, so it's hard. I wouldn't say it's hard to tell, but because if you really observe, it's not just because of the pandemic. Because even before the pandemic, you realize that, of course, I think every country is different because of the cultural habits as well. So it's different. But before that, you also already realize that really young generations, much younger generations, maybe now in their early 20s or even younger, a lot of them do not go to concert halls. I think that, I don't know, is it the same in everywhere, but at least in the places that I've been at, if Tokyo it's like that, in Malaysia is also like that. It's very rare for have younger generations to go there, because to them everything is accessible to just listening to online. You know, I can just, they don't even go and buy a CD, because when I was at my teen time, my hobbies is to go out for CD shopping, to go to look for all those very rare CDs. So whenever I have a chance to travel to another country, I'll tell the people that I'm traveling with, the first thing, bring me to a CD shop so that I can find a CD that I cannot find where I live. So, but nowadays they don't do that. Everything is online, right? So music are so easily, they can just get it so easily. So first thing, so when they listen to music, how much concentrations they're really using when they're listening to music. You know, when you can just play and repeat and repeat and repeat, and you end up like a background music. So that already changed the way of listening. If we go back to even earlier time where CDs recording, all these things are not yet approachable, or it's still too expensive for most people to actually afford them. Those people who really love music, they really have to go to concert halls, or at least if they can afford a radio, you know, they'll always have to tune in the radio, you know, like but they don't get to repeat and repeat listening again. So every time when they listen, they are really focused on listening. So that is one thing. So there's already something, I think there's a trend of changing already. So and also because you don't really hear the 3-dimension thing. So what I realized when I was in Tokyo is that I realized the compositions of younger generations, much younger generations, there's a tendency to be interested in trying to make how should I say this, like try to make an appearance to shock you. So there's a lot of works Of course, there are good work as well. I'm not saying that there's no good work. There's always some good work from younger generation as well. But I noticed there's a lot of tendencies that they're trying to make it so surprising that once you listen once, right, you actually don't have to listen twice because there's no depth in it. Because they don't have the understanding of how sounds work. They are just trying to shock you because that's actually how they grew up, so how they experience sounds around them, you know. So for me, I would think that as a bad thing, but maybe in long term it's actually a normal thing. I can't really be the judge of it. So I think that's something that I see. And you realize a lot of people losing the ideas of physical listening. You realize some sounds that a lot of people maybe I shouldn't say a lot of people because I don't know the whole world, like different cultures is different. So maybe from what I have a chance to observe, okay, there are some amount of people that they don't tend to have the ability to listen to sounds as a space, it's a spatial thing. They are just listen to a sound that is most directly that what they can hear instead of listening to sounds that has a lot of dimensions. That's what I observe. Yeah. So it might go towards that trend, I think. Could be, I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, answer, or is there someone who would like to answer?
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Please.
No, please.
I think in response to your question, I'm thinking about the infrastructure of institutions and the working processes of collaborations as a site of aesthetics. And so for me, particularly from a United States perspective, I think right now the United States is like really grappling with the deep inequity in our society on many levels. And so I don't know if this is a prediction, but my hope is that we will see kind of different structures for music making emerge and reshaping of institutions. And that to some degree conditions the work that is then created or the work that can come to the foreground in society. So I see that as like a place of aesthetic change that may be sped up by the condition of the pandemic.
Lina, I don't know if you want to add something.
Yes, I agree with Eliza and Chong. The same thing is also here in Greece, like Malaysia. Less people from the younger are going to a concert hall to listen to the music because they can choose a performance from YouTube and listen to their home. So this is something that I agree started before the pandemic era and probably will change the aesthetic and will change the touch with the art in future, unfortunately.
As for me, I find it very interesting what you are saying, and it's the same in Hamburg, of course. There is really, if you could look at the big Alfie, so the Elbphilharmonie, there are plenty of buses who came every evening before the pandemic situation. And there were always normally all people higher than 50, 60, 70. But I think sometimes if I'm observing myself, for example, I'm at the Conservatory of Music, so every evening I can hear whatever I want before. And now, and in the first 3 months, it was even so light not to need to go every evening, not to stay every evening, but to be free and not to feel obliged to look for a student, to hear a colleague or others. And after 3 months, I changed the way I felt or I feel, because now I was privileged of sound, of sensitive sound. to remind what it means to hear music in a concert hall, like you showed us. And I think I will have much more of in mind that it is really necessary for me. It is necessary for inspiration. It is necessary for my feeling, for all those things in my life. So I feel for culture. I have another sensitive for culture. And before it was normal. I went there. And now it isn't normal, not at all. I feel really, I feel in the pandemic situation that I need it. I didn't knew that before, not in this precision. I don't know how you are going with it. Is it the same for you? Do you feel privileged of music, of the sensitive of music?
I think I agree with you on that. I think the term is good, the sensitivity. I think that is something that there's a possibility many of us might lose it if this kind of situations continues longer. And I always have a feeling that there's just a personal thought. So I always feel that when human being lost the ability to sense something, to be sensitive towards things that are around you, that is actually is a danger to humanity, I feel, because it will actually triggers off more other problems, I feel, because what I like to always say that is that sometimes just let's say in a not a creative sense, just in a different sense. So if you do not have the ability to feel guilt, you do not know that you are wrong. You do not, so when you do not know that you are wrong, you continue to commit crimes or stuff like that. I mean, I'm not a major in that, so I'm just saying that in a general thought. That's why I feel. So it's the same thing. If you cannot feel things, you're not able to sense something, which means you're not able to understand how another person's feel, or how another person's reacts to certain things. You couldn't reason things with another person. So I think it actually eventually losing sensitivity will eventually not just a loss on artistic side. I think it will be a loss on humanity side as well. I think maybe it's a bit too serious, but I think that is a possibility on that. Yeah, that's why I think arts is quite important.
Yes.
I don't know if Liza, Lina, if you want to say something.
Sure. I mean, I think you said that really beautifully, Silke. That the necessity of hearing these things in all their detail becomes really apparent. So I'm with you on that. And I think I've thought to myself, sometimes in the past I've gone to concerts and, maybe I haven't always been the most charitable listener in every circumstance. And I feel that now I may listen with more love. And, I always try to be a charitable listener, but I think this sense of like the necessity of being very present to the sounds will add to that.
Yes, it's also, for me, it's always a question if you think that music has a certain gesture. You know what I mean? Yes. And if you think, if someone only knows this, where's the gesture? And I think that's the beginning of a changing of aesthetic. And for us, we know what is a gesture. We can communicate even if but what happens to people who are 2 years old, 1.5 years old? Will they listen different when the pandemic has, I hope, gone one day. But I think sometimes
I think it's also in relation with this embodiment of music that Ching mentioned before about is not only listening, but the sense of music, the sense you are listening, you feel with all your body. And I think this is the main change, but even for performing arts, no? If we think in performing arts, we are missing the face, the main part of the face, which is, I think, the most expressive, because of course we have the eyes, which are very expressive, but what happens with mouth, with our instrument? It's like if we are in constant silence, in visual silence, I think, because the instrument we are not seeing anymore. So I think it's kind of, and I think it's related also with the sense of identity, because our voice and our face are our identity too. So what happened with all the children, little children, that they haven't seen a complete face, or face without mask? No, I think, of course, something is changing, and maybe the pandemic thing has accelerated the inevitable, as in some ways the online and the virtual concerts were like they're in new forms of consumption, of music consumption, and now we are like forced to consume music this way. But maybe it's an acceleration of the process that has started, but we weren't so conscious as we are now. To finish, I would like to make a question to you three, because Lina speak about students that underestimate women's capability as composers, and I think, what do you think is the role of professors and teachers in this thing, in this way of thinking? What do we have to improve to have students that they don't think women, or students don't underestimate women composers? What do you think is the role of the professors at the university or teachers at the school?
Can I start?
Yeah, sure.
From my experience, I'm working the last 5 years in a university, and I have a composition class in which every year I have only male students. I don't know why, but sorry. There is a fear that the women composers cannot express with the same feelings, with the same right language, the art. Of course, I cannot accept this position, and if I had the opportunity to have a female student, I could give all of my power to change this thought inside my class, because, as I said, the art has no gender. The art is for everyone, and everyone can create, can think original, can inspire others.
Yeah, I think that the responsibility of faculty is broad, and that so some of it is in curriculum, in what we teach. You know, so we need to be teaching works by people of all genders. We need to be interrogating, are there ideas and approaches that have been discounted because they are perceived as being associated with a particular gender? So we need to be working, you know, both on the level of repertoire and the level of theory and approach. I also find that I do have female students, and that's wonderful. And I have students who come from various sort of marginalized backgrounds. And I find that they often really struggle to believe that they are capable or that they belong in this space. And so I really try to work with them on that mindset, and so that they understand really simple things like I see women are more likely to think that if they revise, that means that their work is bad. Whereas men don't think that. They just think, okay, I'm revising, that's part of composing. They feel a right to revise, whereas women feel I have to get it perfect the first time. So I see these like ingrained ideas, and of course it's not 100% gendered, but I see a tendency. And so I really try to work with students who present those kinds of ideas to get out of that space. But also to be honest with students about what they may face in the field. I don't want to condition people to think of themselves as victims, but my sense is that students really appreciate when teachers are real with them. And so to talk about these things, because in my education, these conversations, if they happened at all, were very much sort of in secret on the side. And so it could feel like taboo to discuss your experiences or to admit that you've experienced discrimination. So I think making these conversations like we're doing today, making these conversations public, making them part of what an education entails is another piece of this.
I find it very interesting when Eliza said that there's, for female, they always think that they have to be a bit perfect and they don't really revise or whatever. But actually, I never thought of that because I've been revising a lot of my works all the time. So it's quite interesting for people to actually have that kind of thinking because of their gender. But I think that's really the society implant of what we should be, and that I think that's a huge problem there. Okay, and in my case in Malaysia, I don't have composition students because, as we spoke of before we can speak of gender, composition itself is already a very rare thing here. I do teach music theory, so most of, actually all of the students I teach for music theories, their aim is to become a music teacher in small, private music school. So they are following a system called ABRSM. So it's a Royal School, it's a UK system which is very common in Malaysia. So everybody who study music, basically they go through that. So I'm teaching them based on that syllabus, but the syllabus is really limited for your understanding of the music of Mozart and Haydn and maybe some early Beethoven. It's not even enough, the knowledge. It's not even enough to actually to understand late Beethoven. So you can see that how squarish, like how stuck they are when they study music here. So what I try to do is that I will always emphasize to them what they are learning for the exam, because it's a very strange culture here that when you learn music, it's more of like getting the certificate, so the parents can actually show the other parents that, my children has this and that. It's a very strange thing, but there will be a long discussion, so I'm not going to go into that. But even if we are talking about university level, it's not high at all. It's very low in Malaysia. It's still very, very low. So you cannot really teach them about Schoenberg, about not even Bartók yet. So you can imagine how low the level is. So I remember once when I go for an interview in one of the university here looking for some job in the university, and then I was speaking to one of the professor, and then I told him that I can actually just come in to do one special class, because I know in the university there's no class about music after Schoenberg, not even Schoenberg. So I thought, because I'm more trained in 20th century music, right? So why not? I can come in, just give your students a chance just to have a class to expose them to something like that, not even go into details, just to expose them, what happens after Schoenberg and what is actually happening right now in the music scenes in all around the world, those that I know. And then the reactions from the professor is that the students here all wants to be K-pop singer. There's no such necessity. So I think the problem is, first thing, of course, regardless of the student mindset, another problem is that in university, if the person in charge, like the professor, are not even trying to give them what they need, that is a huge problem. I see they are just trying to stay at the comfort zone within the level we have here. And that is something that I think requires a lot of changes. But for what I can do right now when I teach theories is that I try to slot in as many examples. When I teach a certain thing, I slot in as many examples, even though it's not directly related to the exam itself, but when there's something connected, I try to just slot it in so that I have some ideas of it. And then, and regarding the male and female part is that I try to slot in like equally. When there's some good works from female composers, I just slot in. When there's a good work from male composers, I just slot in. I don't really tell them this is female or male. So it's just to tell them this is, this example fits this kind of thing, and this is a good work and this or this thing. So I think before, if the students comes before the ideas of having this clear separate segregations of male and female composer, and we start feeding them all the informations from both sides, and when they keep thinking, when they study, the example they see are actually quite equally from both gender, I don't think they will have this concept that there's more male composer or there's more female composer. They just think that it's a natural thing, because in their studies, these are natural part of the thing. So this is also something I try to do when I can, when I teach music theory. Yep.
Yeah, thanks. I don't know if Silke, do you want to add something to finish?
No, I just want to say thank you very much for all those insights. I really found it a very great session. And I'm very curious for the next session in March. So thank you very much to all, and especially to you, Elsa.
Yeah, so thank you for all your words, and remember that next session will be the 22nd of March, and we'll have Silke and also Gabriela Di Lazio and Sakira Ventura, who will be speaking about their projects as curator in different platforms that visibilize women as composers and women players. And I think we can say goodbye. I will quote Joan Baez to finish this session. So you don't get to choose how you're going to die or when. You can only decide how you're going to live now. Thank you for all your experiences, for sharing your experiences, and let's see soon. Bye.
Goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.